Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with part 2 of my June wrap-up. I will link part 1 down below, as well as links, etc., content warnings, all of that. I know I said etc. in the middle. That doesn't make sense. Anyway, the first book I'm going to talk about in this part is The Nobility and Excellence of Women and the Defects and Vices of Men by Lucrezia Marinella, edited and translated by Anne Dunhill. This was our Past It Classics pick. I was the host for the live show, and I will link that down below. This is a nonfiction that is a classic of Renaissance feminism, and this was very, very interesting. So basically, this was written as a rebuttal to this man Giuseppe Passi's diatribe about women's alleged defects, and Lucrezia Marinella responded to that, and it was historically the first time that an Italian woman argued with a man in print, which I love. And so she basically refutes all his points, and this was very, very interesting. The structure of this, it's a kind of classical argument style that means it's not the most readable nonfiction. It's basically divided into sections, and it's a series of quotations taken from ancient sources. It's a particular kind of argument format that is not always the most engaging to read, but there were some fantastic lines in here. I underlined and I noted a bunch of stuff. Some of it is really, really funny. Yeah, it was very satisfying to read some of her comments, and I really did enjoy reading this, and get, I feel like I got a lot out of it, and it was really interesting to see the differences in feminism of this time and feminism today, but also some of the connections and similarities. And I think it's interesting for this argument to consider, if Lucrezia won or not in a different way than we might think of it, because if she won the argument, because if you just read this book by itself, it's well, some of her points are things that we wouldn't recognize as being logical because she's using classical mythology to show the strength of women and things like that. But for the context of the time and this particular style of argument, that would have been considered evidence. Giuseppe Passi used that as evidence, and so she used counter evidence. And so in that sense, I think it's clear that she did win this argument. Obviously her base argument is that women are just as important and talented and smart and valuable as men, which obviously is true, but even if you look at it in the context of, for her time period, would she have been considered as winning this argument? I think she would have been. One thing that she talks about a lot that I thought was really interesting is this idea of some men believing that women owe them romance and affection, and that's obviously something we talk about a lot today, and I think her views on that were very progressive, even if again some of this is very much of its time. But anyway, I got a lot out of this, and I gave The Nobility and Excellence of Women and the Defects and Vices of Men 3.75 stars. Next, I finished The Lord of Stariel by A.J. Lancaster. This is the first book in a series, and as this is on the back, the Lord of Stariel is dead. Long live the Lord of Stariel, whoever that is, which I think is a great way to sum up what this is about. So this is set in the manor of Stariel, which is this magical, tiny bit sentient manor. There is kind of a consciousness there that selects the next ruler. And our main character, Hedda, is summoned there along with everyone else in their family because her father has just died, and they need to select the new, the land of Stariel needs to select the new ruler or caretaker, the head of the family, basically. And surprising everybody, except probably the reader, Hedda is chosen as the next Lord of Stariel. No one else thought it was going to be her. They all assumed it was either going to be one of her brothers or one of her cousins. This is also a fae fantasy series, so there are the fae in this world, or not in this world specifically, but in the other world kind of, and they can cross over and cross between, and that causes a lot of problems. And so the book is about Hedda just kind of scrambling to figure out what to do. She was never raised to believe that she would be the head of Stariel, so she has to try and figure this out. She's also been living in the city as as part of a theater troupe, because she did what do you call it? Special effects magic, basically, and that is considered not something that proper young ladies do, and she's very much not a proper young lady, and so she's also adjusting to being back home, other people's perceptions of her. She also comes back, and their butler, Wynne, who is young, he's their age, suddenly he's very attractive, and they had always been friends, but now she feels something different between them, and a lot of things happen from there. There ends up being some mysteries that Wynne and Hedda and some of her family, her cousins and brothers, are trying to figure out, and conspiracies and secrets and all of this. And I was not enjoying this at first, but I ended up really, really liking it, because even though I was really liking the writing and the premise, and I liked Hedda as a character well enough, I just wasn't grabbed by this. for one thing, the romance wasn't really my thing. We know I'm a hard sell on friends to lovers, and I just wasn't like super invested in like the characters and what was happening. But then once Hedda actually like is chosen as the next Lord of Stariel and other things start happening, then I was super invested in the plot, and I ended up liking Hedda as a character more, and I also ended up liking her interactions with Wynne a lot more. Like their relationship really, I think, worked for me a lot better as the book went on. I still feel like the employer-employee thing is a little weird, but I do think given other things that happen, like I think we're gonna deal with that. But yeah, I ended up really liking this. I was so invested in like the plot. Like, there were a couple of things that I knew were coming, but I liked the way those were done. And then there were some things that I did not see coming. And so that was super interesting. I really ended up liking the side characters as well. And I like what this book says about like family and coming home, and like how Hedda realizes that she doesn't need everybody else's approval, but also that she can still, like, she still has family who love her and appreciate her. I just really liked that. And I also enjoyed the setting and like the magical aspects of this book. So I ended up really liking it. I do want to mention that there is a moment where somebody outs another character, and I can kind of see why it happened in context. This person clearly didn't think that the character they were talking to was going to tell anyone, but it was unnecessary. Like, it didn't have to happen like that. There was no reason that we couldn't have had this conversation and they wouldn't have like had to use this person's name, you know? So I do want to mention that, but otherwise I enjoyed this, and I gave The Lord of Stariel 4 stars. Next, I finished Longshadow by Olivia Atwater. I have finally read this. This is the third and final book, I think, sadly, in the Regency Fairy Tales series, which is a series of companion novels. They're obviously set in the Regency, except there's magic. And specifically there are fae, and I loved this so much. Like, I have loved every single book in this series, and this one is no exception. I can't say too much about the premise for this one because of spoilers for the other books, but it involves kind of a mystery because our main characters start investigating why these mysterious deaths keep happening of these young women in London. That leads them to thinking that it might be Lord Longshadow, who we've heard about before, as being like very not one of the good fae lords. And there is also a romance, as there has been in the other books. And like, I know, like I said, I can't give you too much of the summary for this one, but I loved this so much. I loved our main characters. I really enjoyed their developing relationship. I think Olivia Atwater is just fantastic at this like love realization kind of thing. Like, I am so impressed at the way she can build a romance before the characters even realize that it's a romance, you know? Like, the reader knows what's going on, but the characters don't figure it out until later, and I think that's a hard thing to get right, but I think she really does. I love her characterization. I love her writing. I love what this book says about grief, like the themes, and how it talks about how, like, it's a very like comforting book in the sense that it's like grief is hard and fear of death is normal, and like it's okay to be scared, like that kind of thing. And the way that people handle grief in different ways. Like, I really think the side characters were well written as well. There's a couple that like I cannot stand and yet they had a couple of scenes that really like tugged at my heartstrings. Like, I just think this is a very like humanizing series, which is funny because some of the characters are not human, but they are still people, you know? I also really enjoyed the mystery element of this one. Like, the way that was written in this book, I thought that was very interesting. I loved the magic. This is just, yeah, just such a heart-filling series, and I love that this whole series really talks about like making it through when things are hard, and how like the world, like there's so much wrong in the world, but you can fix little things yourself, and how that is important too. And I just love it so much. Like, my only complaints with this one were with the ending. Like, I really loved a lot of the things that happened at the end, but there were a couple of things that I didn't. One of them is Hugh's ending. It's not that I didn't like what happened. I actually would have really liked his ending, except that I wish it had been fully his choice rather than kind of like he was talked into it by other characters. That really bothered me, and it seemed very out of place in the context of a book where so much of it was about individual people choosing to view things and do things differently. So I didn't love that. And then the other thing is like much more personal preference, and that is that like part of the ending to me didn't fit with the rest of the series. Like, part of the ending felt like a very like fantasy genre ending, as opposed to like, even though these books are fantasy, like these characters and their struggles and their goals and their personalities and like the themes of this book are all so very human, like even the characters who are not human, that it kind of hurt to see an ending that felt very much like, again, like a fantasy genre ending. And I can't say a lot because of spoilers, I did like an extensive Goodreads review, so I might link that below if you want those spoilers. But like I do really love the way the ending of this book like specifically contradicts or like attacks some things. And I do also think that Olivia Atwater's author's note makes a lot of sense of it as well. And maybe I just need to view this ending in the context of just her author's note rather than how I view the like messages and themes of the rest of the series, and especially the way that it deals with grief and loss. Like I felt like we were skipping over some things that the rest of the series was really dealing with. And I think that there are other ways we could have ended the book that had maybe a similar tone, but that to me didn't undermine the messages and themes of the rest of the book. I know that was very vague, but overall I did really, really love this. Like even though I had those issues with the ending, I still loved this book so much. I still gave Longshadow 5 stars, and I would highly, highly recommend this series. I loved it. Next, I finished The Kingdom by Jess Rothenberg. This is a sci-fi, like, kind of futuristic book. We're following our main character Anna, which, by the way, I love this cover, but this is not what Anna looks like. Like we were specifically told what she looks like, and it's not anything like this, which is a little annoying. But anyway, so we're following our main character Anna, and she is a fantasist, which are basically like artificially created like humanoid people who are part of what is essentially like if Disneyland were like a super theme park and had all kinds of like artificial environments, and like the fantasists kind of like the Disney princesses, except like their whole purpose is to like do what the guests want and give them a happy vacation and all of this. And there's also like genetic engineering like with the animals, and I think Anna and the other fantasists are also genetically engineered as well. And Anna's very happy here. This is kind of like their safe place. Like she knows that the outside world is really horrible, and so she feels safe here. But then things start happening where some of Anna's sisters, like the other fantasists, they start acting strangely. Some of them even disappear. Anna starts wondering if she really is safe here, why they aren't told things about the world outside, and she ends up crossing paths with this boy, Owen, who seems to be more aware of like what's really going on. And then we know this from the beginning, but Owen has actually disappeared, presumably been murdered, and Anna is on trial for his murder. And so throughout the book we get like snippets from the trial, which I really, really loved that multimedia element. And this also like was part of why the book was so engrossing and compelling to read, because we wanted to, like, I wanted to find out, you know, how we got there. I wanted to see if my ideas were correct. I also, like, the chapters themselves were very short, so that also made this very compelling. And I really, really enjoyed this. You guys know I love an exploration of personhood. So I really loved seeing Anna's character development and her journey, and like the way this book talks about like consciousness and like identity, you know, like the idea of a self and all of that. I thought the setting was super interesting, and the scientific aspects. I liked Anna's and Owen's scenes together. Like I wasn't like super invested in their relationship. It does end up becoming a friendship and like romance later. But I did like them together. I thought they had some good scenes, and I also really, really appreciate that Anna's sense that something is wrong and her like deciding to try and do something about it, her starting to explore more about her world and who she is and all of this, that starts happening even before she meets Owen. Like Owen does kind of inspire her to do more, but it's not like she starts getting feelings for this boy and he like opens her eyes to the world, you know? So I personally really liked that. And I can't remember if I said this, but I also really liked Anna just as a character and her growth, her development. I really enjoyed this book, and I gave The Kingdom 4.5 stars. Next I finished Heartless Prince by Angela DeVito and Lee Dragoon. Sorry, I had to like look up who it was by. This is a graphic novel that has a really, really low Goodreads rating. Like I was surprised actually. It's like 3.3. I was like, wow, people really hate this. That's pretty low for Goodreads. And after reading it, I can see why. I didn't hate this, but so this is a graphic novel following, I don't remember our characters' names because I read this from the library. So our main character is Evany, who's an orphaned princess that is taken in by this other royal family, and the Prince Ammon of that kingdom, he ends up having something terrible happen to him, and so Evany ends up going on a journey to try and basically heal him, and to fight these monsters that are, you know, attacking their kingdom and the other kingdoms as well. Yeah, so it says Evany makes it her mission to retrieve Ammon's heart, because that is like part of what's happening to him, and save Nissa, who is his sister, taking her into the mysterious witchlands. There she will discover a secret about her past that will change everything. So yeah, this was fine. I liked some of the art actually, even though like the structure of some of the like fight scenes and like the ordering of the panels was sometimes confusing and hard to follow, which might have also partly been related to like the plot itself being sometimes hard to follow. I wanted more from the main characters and the relationships, and I also hated the ending of this. Like I found out that this is going to be the first volume in a proposed trilogy, so the ending is a little less annoying if you keep that in mind, but I still think it's a cop-out. Like, I don't know, it's very frustrating. I'm probably going to continue the series from the library, but I hope they're better than this one. Like really the highlights were like some of the art I thought was good, some of the ideas were interesting, and I did also like Emer and Iona. Those two characters were supporting characters and I really liked them and their dynamic, but everything else just was kind of lacking. I think the plot wasn't super well done. I think the characterization wasn't great, the like relationships weren't great. Yeah, just wasn't a big fan of this, and I gave Heartless Prince 3 stars. Next, I finished The Mirrorwood by Diva Fagan. This is about a young girl named Fable, and she and her family live kind of close to this wood where there's this thing called the Blight. And if you are touched by the Blight, something like magical happens to you, you end up cursed, and it's really like dangerous, it's viewed as dangerous, and there are people in this kingdom who are dedicated to finding people who have this blight and killing them. And our main character Fable has been blighted ever since she can remember, like even before she can remember, and her blight is that she does not have her own face. She has to like borrow the faces from other people, and if she doesn't do this in time, like within 3 days I think, she'll actually die. And so what she basically does is she has to touch someone's face and then she can copy their face onto her own. And her family, she has a large family, like a lot of siblings, and they all kind of take turns helping her with this because if you also like, if she copies your face, it also like affects the person she takes it from. Like they're a lot weaker and tired and everything, and so her family have taken turns with this, and they're all working together to hide her from these people who try to kill blighted people. But one day some blight hunters actually do discover them, and so in order to escape, Fable ends up running into the forest. She's pursued by Vicarax, a young girl who is also a blight hunter, and Fable and Vicarax end up very unwillingly becoming allies to try and break the curse in this wood for good, because the reason that all of this has happened is that there is a demon prince who is in charge of this kingdom when it's supposed to be like the true prince who has been cursed. And so they're trying to wake up the true prince and defeat the demon prince, and if they do that they think all of the blight will go away, and so they are trying to do this. They end up meeting other characters along the way, end up learning more about the kingdom and the magic and the blight, and I really liked this. I thought it was really well done. I loved Fable as a main character. My heart hurt for her so much. Like the way, this is another book that talks a lot about like identity and self, because she's thinking about how like Fable is really like having a hard time with not knowing what she looks like. She's like, do I even have a face? If I'm only copying other people, am I even a person? Like, and it just hurts so much to see her feeling like she doesn't matter, because she doesn't have like her own face. I really loved some of the other characters as well. I really loved Lyrian. I really loved some of the side characters, like some of the friends that our characters meet along the way. As I've kind of alluded to, I really loved the themes and the way this book deals with ideas like identity and self. I also really liked how it explored like stories and like history, and pain, and like what pain is good for, or like what its purpose is. I really enjoyed the writing of this book. I loved Moth, who is a cat companion that Fable has who she can talk with. I really enjoyed the ending of this book. I'm very impressed at the way that Diva Fagan could balance all of these different like things, and like the tone of the ending, to me it felt just right. I also liked the inclusion of the subtle powers, who are these kind of like deities who can interact and interfere with the human world sometimes. I should have mentioned, by the way, that I read an arc of this book, but I got it for review like after it had already come out, which is why this review is so late. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. Really, like one of the only drawbacks for me was Vicarax. Like, it's not that I didn't like her. I think she was an interesting character. I felt for her. I liked seeing her development, but this is one of those cases where there were some things that happened with her that I think, like, sometimes something happens in a book where it's like, I am not saying this shouldn't have happened, but I think it should have happened earlier in the story, so we had more time to deal with it. And that's what I felt like for Vicarax. yeah, it was just very frustrating the way that was done, but otherwise I really enjoyed this, and I gave the Mirrorwood 4.5 stars. Next, I finished The Lie Tree by Frances Harding. This was for mine and Hannah's Frances Harding read-along. I will link that live show down below, and this was a reread for me. So this is one of Frances Harding's most historical books, and like least fantastical. Hannah and I also discussed how it is the only one of her books that has won a big award, like the Coastal Book of the Year award, and we discussed how like we think her other books should have won it more than this one. But anyway, so this was really interesting because in prior years this has been one of my favorites from her, and after rereading all her books, or almost all of them, I don't think it's my favorite of hers anymore. Like, I don't think it's one of my favorites, but it has some of my favorite scenes in it, and I do think it's very interesting. So this is set like around the time of Darwin's Origin of the Species coming out, which is a part of the story. We're following our main character, Faith, and her father is a reverend, and their whole family ends up moving to like this small island. They are apparently fleeing some kind of scandal. And the people on the island are not super friendly with them, especially after some rumors start getting out. And then there is a tragedy in Faith's family that really obviously affects her. And she ends up finding this thing called a lie tree because of these things that happen, where if you feed it a lie, it will reveal a truth to you. And so Faith starts doing this. She becomes really determined to uncover why this mysterious death happened. It looks like maybe there was foul play here. And she ends up becoming really tangled in this web of like deceit, some of it her own, but some of it other people's. And like I said, there is like a big mystery element in this book as well. And yeah, this, like I was saying, this is very interesting. I have mixed feelings about this. I always love Frances Harding's writing. I think the lie tree concept is fascinating, and I think Faith is a really interesting main character because I think she's Frances Harding's like meanest protagonist, but kind of nastiest. But I think it's understandable because of what she's going through. And this book is interesting because we really see Faith acting out of character the entire book. Like, we know what she's like before, but because of this big thing that happens, this traumatic event, and the things that she learns after it, it really, like I said, it makes her act out of character for the rest of it, which I think is a very interesting choice, like, for an author to do. I thought some of the supporting characters, like some of the main supporting characters, were really complex and interesting. I thought the setting was interesting. I thought the mystery was, again, interesting, especially with the way some of the reveals were handled. Like, that's something I remember from the first time I read this book, just being very impressed by that. My issues with this book had to do with some of the main themes. So like, for example, a lot of this book, like, Faith wants to be a natural scientist, and a lot of this book is just like really beating you over the head with like, women didn't do that back then, which is true. Like, Hannah and I talked about this as well. It's like, we don't disagree. It's just very heavy-handed, which Frances Harding's books usually aren't. Like, there were still some great lines, there was still some great way that feminism was incorporated into this story, but overall it was much more heavy-handed than her themes usually are. And then also the like whole like science versus religion dichotomy in this book, that also kind of frustrated me. I think it makes sense for the time period and for the context, because like this, it would have very much felt like an either or situation, like when all this about evolution was coming out. So I get that for this context, but this is something that bothers me more now than when I first read this book, because I feel like there are like people today who still act like you have to choose one or the other, and that is very frustrating to me personally because that's never been my experience or like my family's experience. And again, I think for the context it makes sense, but just the way some of that was handled was, again, there wasn't a lot of nuance there, and I just really didn't like how this book seemed to endorse the idea that you have to have, like, you can only have one or the other, because for a lot of people that's not true, but this book kind of acts like it's true, and this is something that, again, very subjectively frustrated me more because it's something that people today, a lot of people today still act like you can only have one or the other. But overall, I did enjoy this. I think it was well written. There are some scenes in this book that I just think about a lot because they are so well crafted and they stand out to me so much. So even though this book is no longer in like my top tier of Frances Harding favorites, I did still enjoy it, and I gave The Lie Tree 4 stars. And finally, the last book I'm going to talk about in this part of the wrap-up is Spellcrackers Honeymoon by Tansy Rayner Roberts. This is the 3rd volume in the, I always do this, I think, Tea and Sympathetic Magic series, which is a series of very short novellas that I have just been loving this year. They're just like so cozy and they make me so happy, and they're so like romantic and funny and charming. And in this volume, we're obviously following our main character on her honeymoon with another character, and it's just so much fun. I didn't enjoy this one quite as much as the first two, but I still love the writing. I still love these characters. There was also a like magical mystery element in this one that was very interesting. I just feel like the setting for this series is also fun, and I had a good time with this. I don't have a lot to say because it is so short, but I've been really enjoying this series, and I gave Spellcrackers Honeymoon 4 stars. Oh, one thing I also want to mention, besides like, you know, really enjoying the characters and the relationships and everything, one thing I want to mention too is I mentioned for the second volume, I was not sure how a particular conflict was going to be resolved. Well, we get some hints about how that might be happening in this third book, and I like that. I think it's being dealt with appropriately. So anyway, really enjoyed this. Okay everybody, so that was the second part of my June wrap-up. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them, or if you're going to pick them up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!